we'll be delighted to share the presentation afterwards. So as Grant said, my name is Andrew Renison. I lead agency partnerships at AppsFlyer, and thrilled to be able to moderate this panel for the next sort of 20, 25 minutes. And as Grant said at the top, please do share any questions in the Q&A. We'd be happy to get to those as well. So we've heard from Kevin and Sharon. I want to also give the opportunity to Nebo from Zynga and Max from AppsFlyer just to introduce themselves. So rather than me do it, I'm going to hand it over to them. Nebo, could you sort of quickly introduce yourself, the company that you work for, and one little priming question: what is it that springs to mind when you hear the term creative optimization? So Nebo, I'll hand it over to you first.
Hello, everyone. As you guys mentioned, my name is Nebo Radovic, or the real pronunciation is Nebo Radovic. It's a little more complicated. I work at Zynga as the director of user acquisition, and I oversee the titles that are built in North America. So casual games, words games, and licensed games such as Game of Thrones Slot. The first thing that comes to my mind when it comes to creative testing is really having a tight creative reporting in place, and tells you what's working, what's not working, that's supported with creative naming conventions, that's supported with creative tagging, and where you can understand what's working, what's not working. And again, that supports all the channels, which is not always the case. There's been some challenges with Facebook and Google in the past. So without good creative reporting, it's really hard to do creative testing. And that's something that I've been focused on a lot in the past few years at Zynga.
Great. Max?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Max. I am Senior Account Manager at AppsFlyer, so working with our enterprise partners on the attribution side. I've been in the mobile UA space for almost 9 years now. Spent several of those years at ironSource on the UA team there, and just have worked with a variety of partners over the years on UA and go-to-market strategies. And then in terms of what comes to mind first when I hear creative analytics, I think really it's just the sheer amount of work that goes into it. I think it really is a tedious process. A/B testing different concepts and end cards and content, things like that, is really quite the process. But at the same time, just one of those things where we've seen time and time again what a huge difference a really slight change in a creative can make in performance. So that's really what comes to mind for me first.
Great, thank you. And obviously you all met Sharon and Kevin earlier, so we'll hear some insights from them as we move forward as well. So first question from me, and Kevin and Sharon both touched on it in the presentation, was, it wouldn't be a presentation or a webinar that didn't reference iOS 14, many of the privacy changes that we've seen over the course of the last few years, and certainly more to come. What are the developments that, specific to that, that have impacted different people's approaches to creative? What can advertisers, and certainly many on this call, what can they be doing or thinking about to help combat that signal loss when they think about testing, analyzing, and iterating on those creatives? And Kevin, maybe I'll kick it over to you to start us off there.
Sure. So I think to start, a lot of optimizing creative in a downturn and the situation that we all have been dealing with since iOS 14, they share a lot of components. When I think about the privacy piece specifically, I think about that from two angles. One, and it very much mirrors what I said in the presentation. You have to design a process that worked with iOS 14, and you have to be sure that the data that you're getting is good from iOS 14, and it's limited fundamentally. So what do I mean by that? If let's say you're an advertiser with just an iOS app and you don't have Android to lean on for creative testing, and you're trying to test 100 creatives in one campaign. It's that fundamentally will not work because, for most of SCAD's lifespan, it's had only 100 campaign IDs to pass back. And I don't want to get too technical here, but essentially, Facebook itself probably does not know which creative is driving which conversion. And by extension, you as the advertiser do not understand which creative is driving which conversion. So, you want to make sure that those signals are good, and that you're operating off correct data that's, with good hygiene. So that you can proceed knowing that the data that you have is solid. And then what does that mean sort of for production? And I'm sure, Sharon touched on this as well. It's a smaller amount of more differentiated swings is going to be a lot more impactful than, hey, we're going to throw 100 creatives in here and test, white backgrounds versus green backgrounds or something like this in a really micro way. So in conclusion, very similar situation. I think it's all about doing less with more, or doing more with less.
For sure. And Max, what's the kind of AppsFlyer view? You're obviously sitting across the measurement side of things. What are you seeing in this?
Yeah, I think there are two main points I want to make that I've seen advertisers who've been successful over the last couple of years with Scan. First and foremost, there seems to be an emphasis on really understanding the funnel, understanding different CPA actions, what the user journey is going to be like, and ideally being able to create at least a somewhat predictable LTV model. If you can do that, you can then focus sort of on the front end metrics that Sharon spoke about earlier, things like IPM, install rates, things like that. That's where the creative optimization will come to play. But the emphasis really is going to be on understanding that funnel, understanding the LTV of your users. And then from an efficiency standpoint, I really think there is a huge emphasis on understanding your supply sources, where you're spending, where your valuable users are coming from, and why. I think previously before Scan, there was really an emphasis on volume and testing out different networks and solely a focus on the numbers, right? What were the different numbers? What did ROAS look like? And now there really is a focus on, I think, different channels and what the context is. And it also touches again on one of Sharon's points earlier of creators and UGC campaigns and really targeting very specific subsets of users. And that's a good way to kind of use your spend more efficiently. So I think those are a couple things.
Great. And Alina, I've seen a couple of questions come through on the chat. We can get to those in the end, but Max touched on those different channels. So maybe we'll surface what some of those look like. Second question I've got is there's been a lot of noise, and Nebo, this is aimed at you specifically. There's been a lot of noise recently around AI. Google announcing that they're getting into that space, ChatGPT getting a lot of press, a lot of headlines. At Zynga, are you currently leveraging AI tools to increase, or improve creative volume, increase the efficiency, and what do you see the impact of that being as we move through 2023?
It's a great question, and the answer is it's a little harder to answer because for bigger public companies, licensing is super important, and it's still unclear how AI generated art is licensed. If you guys have been following the news on this, I mean, there's been a lot of lawsuits in the past few weeks. I believe like Getty Images sued Stable Diffusion, et cetera. So it's a little tricky to use technology like AI technology to generate creative at scale. With that being said, it is the most exciting development on the creative front that I've seen in years. If you guys had a chance to play with Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, it's super easy to generate characters. It's super easy to use other technologies to animate those characters, generate music, and create super engaging, high quality assets. And not necessarily ads, but assets. So I think it's going to help with two things. First, it's going to make things much easier to generate a lot of creatives if we need them. We just discussed about how just the sheer amount of creatives is not that important anymore. But the other thing that's going to be really great about these technologies is they come in pair with technologies that analyze creatives and analyze assets themselves. So if you want to understand like what makes a successful video successful, you could easily leverage AI technology to understand what's behind that video, and then like do automatic creative tagging, and then kind of inform your creative roadmap that way. So find top 10 creatives out there, understand what are the core elements of those creatives, the way AI sees them, and then try to recreate your own creatives using your own assets, leveraging those keywords or tags or whatever the outputs are. I find that to be super exciting. I think creative automation is going to change significantly as a result of that. And I encourage everyone to play with these tools, whether you want to use them or not, because of licensing, that's up to you. What's your appetite for it? But it's super exciting. You should definitely use them. I use ChatGPT and similar tools to generate ad copy, to work with generate push notification copy. It's super easy and very, very helpful. And again, I encourage everyone to try this.
Great real world advice and experience there. Thank you. Sharon, on the sort of, and I'm actually going to tie in the prepped question, but I'm also going to tie in some of the live ones to this as well. So just to keep you on your toes. But what are the sort of interesting trends that you're seeing develop in market? And obviously the naming of this webinar is optimizing within a marketing downturn, and what that looks like from a current environment perspective. And Alina had a couple of questions around like, how are you continually coming up with new conceptual themes? Are brands that you're seeing revisit previous creative concepts, or are they continuously iterating? And what does that kind of process look like? We'd love to get your perspective on that.
For sure. To answer the first question, something that I've noticed as of the last year really is something that I really like, and it's all about optimizing what you have. I've seen lots of brands utilizing, whatever they do specifically for Twitter. Maybe they leverage a screenshot of that in a meta ad, or it might be something that they do specifically for TikTok, then they throw in Reels on Instagram. So there's a lot of kind of like mixing of assets in different platforms to test out what happens. And I think that's, brands being really down to earth, acknowledging that folks are not just in one specific platform, but everyone's on everything all the time, all day. And it's not even about the specific time of the day, but it's about, you wake up, you check your phone, you go to sleep, you're on your phone, middle of, even during a meeting, you might be on your phone as well. So it's about that intermix of assets all over the place. So I really enjoy that, because I think folks are being like super smart about, reusing a lot of the creative that they have in different platforms. That's one thing that I see. And then obviously a huge thing has been, creator content, and I definitely push for it in my presentation. But something that I noticed is I think certain brands had leaned too much on it, and they lost their own branding through it. So there's a lot of really, really good UGC content out there. But there's also a lot of content that now gets pretty much confused by with organic content that you really don't know which brand we're talking about. And so I really do believe that mixing up those UGC assets with quite branded, more refined assets in your mix is crucial to keep that brand consistency going. Make sure that users remember your logo, your colors, your messaging, etc. When they check, their phone during the day. And so it's almost like we've been through that anti-renaissance over the last couple of years, but now I feel like we're going back towards that renaissance moment again. People need to be refining again because there's so many brands that almost do the same these days, right? So I think we really will differentiate ourselves by that brand messaging, that brand look and feel, obviously mixing it with continuing to test out creator content. Hopefully that answers the first question. And then I believe Alina asked if you ever revisit all creator concepts. Absolutely. I think, sometimes what I do with my team is whenever we come up with brand new challenger creative for our clients, it might be that at a certain given moment, a specific concept doesn't work. That can be due to 1,000 different things, not just the creative itself, even how the creative was launched or what's happening in the world at the moment, or who knows, right? So it's always important to every couple of months revisit those ideas. Absolutely. And then how can you come up with new conceptual themes? That's a great question. There's a few things that you should be looking at. One, obviously, industry insights, what's happening in your specific industry. If you're in the gaming industry, check out the latest news. What's the latest technology, or what is the general approach in the industry? That's super important. Obviously, take a look at what your competitors are doing. I do this all the time. It's crucial because now everyone's doing something different on every channel that they're in. And obviously they're doing their own research themselves. So one, you can differentiate yourself better from them. And two, sometimes you can even, by looking at something, you can get an idea of what you can do yourself. And 3, I would say just constant brainstorming. I think, throw a lot of ideas at the wall, you're going to come up with a lot of really good things. And sometimes what we do with our team is for any given client, we just have a general list of things that we want to test out. And then, provided those concepts don't get selected for that specific month, we can save them for later or even present them to another client. So I think those are generally good tips to follow.
Great, thank you. And Max, so within that, we've got some great tips, some great feedback around testing and iterating and trial and error almost to a certain extent. When you look at some of the challenges that some of AppsFlyer's brands are facing, what are the sort of consistent themes that you're hearing from clients when it comes to optimizing creatives?
Yeah, so I think something I see regularly across the board is oftentimes advertisers will find maybe 1 or 2 different creatives that performing better than the rest of their creatives. So they take the majority of their budget and they'll push it solely into 1 or 2 campaigns. And I think that there are a couple of things that play into that specifically. First and foremost, you may be missing out on an entirely different subset of users who just are not responding to that creative, right? There are other types of creatives, there are other strategies that you can potentially use that can reach a whole new set of users. On top of that, when you're focusing only on 1 or 2 creatives, eventually the performance will go down for those campaigns. It's just a matter of time. And it's really important for advertisers to kind of continuously innovate and stay ahead of the curve, consistently test new creatives, because eventually your top performing creatives will need to be replaced with new ones. And if you're not ahead of the game and consistently doing that, you're going to lose valuable time just between those creative sets essentially that you have. So I think that really is a big challenge, which is if you have these 1 or 2 creatives that are doing well, how do we justify allocating budget to testing out new creatives? So that's definitely something that we see, and it's really going to vary depending on the company and the advertiser and where they're spending. It's not a one size fits all answer, but that is definitely something to consider. And it is very important to just continuously test new things and innovate, because things that worked 2 years ago aren't working now. And this is a very, very fast paced industry. And the same will be said in a couple of years from now about campaigns that are performing today.
Definitely. And I think that's true of the industry, but it's also true of consumers, right? We sit in our bubble here of, agency, advertiser, measurement partner, but from the consumer themselves, everything is moving at that rapid pace. So that kind of freshness of creative and conversation with brands is crucial. Nebo, I'm coming to you next with a whole host of questions from the chat. So get prepared. But I'm going to look to specifically around like your experience at Zynga, obviously a brand that everyone on this call I'm sure has heard of or at least engaged with in some way, shape or form. What have you seen, and this is a question from Matt, what have you seen in terms of understanding of LTV, that kind of consumer journey in light of the privacy that we sort of opened the panel with? Has that kind of influenced what you do from a creative aspect? And then maybe tying that in as well to what you're seeing in terms of best practices around different channels, perspectives. What does that look like for Zynga?
Yeah, so one thing that changed significantly with the introduction of AT&T is that we have to look at creative more holistically and try to understand like what the impact of creative on retention, on cost, and what are the limitations of the kind of new environment when it comes to testing different strategies. If we were like solely focused on driving payers and that's not working anymore, do we need to change our product or our creative strategy to drive lower CPI users and kind of change the almost unit economics entirely by focusing just on kind of lower quality, higher scale customers? So that's something that where creatives can help you tremendously. Like you can change your creative approach or the approach to creative, go with a slightly more casual message, work with celebrities. There are different ways you can kind of do creative segmentations to lower the cost and bring lower quality users. But again, if your kind of LTV is still greater than CPI, you should be fine. When it comes to creative testing and creative channels, that's actually a great question, because I think a few things changed in the past few years. First of all, it completely moved to Android. most of the creative testing is nowadays done on Android. Some people, I guess, do it on iOS and leverage fingerprinting to do that. But based on what I know from like my friends in the industry, most of the people do it on Android. When it comes to channel allocation, I think there's more, people are more open to test different channels outside of Facebook. For example, Unity is one of them because end cards are kind of uniformed, and the difference when it comes to video performance is not as great. A lot of developers are using Google as well, it was almost impossible to do creative testing on Google a few years ago. And now you can do it with different ad groups and just like try to understand how different themes or creative themes are performing. So there's been like quite a few developments on that front. But again, it's primarily Android focused, at least in my environment or Zynga. And it focuses on kind of top of the funnel because of the limitations we have when it comes to the quality of signal, the amount of data we're getting back from networks, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. And Max, I don't know whether you want to just chime in on specifically when it comes to the subscription model. What have you seen potentially there when it comes to apps that are looking to drive that consistent? Because those signals did disappear for a period, and obviously SCAD 4.0 is just around the corner. Like, is that going to change things?
Yeah, happy to touch on that. I think, Scan 4.0 hopefully will change things, right? We'll be able to provide additional touch points. There will still be blind spots there, but I do think there is value in A/B testing different conversion rates and different LTVs. It will be really important because let's say hypothetically we're looking at a health and fitness app that is subscription based. So you're going to have a variety of different types of users who are coming into your app, different ages, demographics, things like that. So it will be important to understand, what the LTV of a certain subset of user is versus a different subset of users, if that makes sense. And also understanding different conversion rates. If you have three different price plans, understanding what the conversion rates are from free to pay trial for each of those levels. And then doing so, you can sort of optimize how you price those different plans out. And then also your different media mixes, right? If you have people who are ages 24 to 30, maybe have a higher conversion rate or higher LTV of people who are 50 to 60, that will ultimately impact what your bid strategy looks like on different supply sources and media mixes. So there's definitely value in doing that. Again, it's not going to be a one size fits all thing, but being able to just accurately model out LTVs for different audience segmentations is going to be important there.
Yeah, great insight. Thank you. Shane's dropped a question in. Obviously, it differs by vertical, it differs by brand, but are you seeing, I'll pose this maybe to Nevo and to the Headlight team, are you seeing a general rule of thumb when it comes to percentage of overall marketing, when it comes to testing? Like, is there a general rule of thumb that advertisers can look to for that testing phase? Sharon and Kevin, maybe either of you have seen any from the brands that you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing that I think about here is like, where are you in the life cycle of the product? Like, if you're kind of advertising for the first time and you want to scale really for the first time, and you don't have a clear sense of what's working in the test environment and what will work at scale for your product, testing should be a higher percentage of budget in that case than it would be if you sort of figured some things out, you have some threads to follow, you have some concepts you can iterate on, and those concepts have shelf lives of like 3 to 6 months or something like that. Conversely, if you're sort of in a mature state, you're spending a stable amount, everything's pretty consistent, you can probably dial it down a little bit. In terms of what percentage, just like to give you a number seems to be appropriate, I see consistently like in the 8 to 15 range. It sort of depends. It really depends on a lot of factors. But I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well around just to add, sorry, Nevo, but just around that kind of point at where you're at in your journey, because Sharon touched on something in the presentation around the trust, and buying habits are changing and consumers have to have that level of trust with your brand, and that can inform the stage at which you're at with that creative relationship and the brand relationship. On that, sorry, Nevo, I cut you off there.
I really like Kevin's comment. Just wanted to add, depends on which channels you're using to test as well. Some channels are more expensive than others. And some channels require significantly more creative than others, which again means more budget. So that's the only one more dimension I wanted to add.
Sure. And just to keep you off mic, Nebo, one of the attendees has asked around outside of Twitter, Meta, TikTok, kind of Snap, etc. Are there any other interesting creative tests that you've seen either from within Zynga or perhaps some of your competitor set? Anything that springs to mind?
I've seen a lot of folks use Unity actually for creative testing outside of the SRL, like self-reporting or self-attributing networks. I think it just got significantly harder to test on those networks too because of no fingerprinting on iOS and things getting more expensive, and also them moving to the AAA UHD type of reporting where you don't have the same granularity of reporting. So a lot of smaller developers are leveraging other channels to understand what's working and what's not working. So if you're trying to find an ad that's going to work on Facebook Audience Network, you better use Unity for that than Facebook, because it's a little harder to kind of brute force the delivery there and understand whether it's going to work or not. So that's the major change or difference. And in some cases, if you're testing a playable end cards or playables, you can't really leverage most of these bigger networks. So you have to go with kind of smaller networks like M11, Unity, etc., who do support certain ad formats. And I think that's something that a lot of folks have been playing around for the last few years, and it's worth exploring, especially playable end cards. They can really make your performance significantly better.
Thank you. Couple more questions from the chat, and I'm very mindful of everyone still on the call that's given us a huge amount of their time, which we're really appreciative of. But Ray's asked a question around what tools are people using to help assess how well are things working? What does success look like? How are you measuring those KPIs? Obviously a loaded response there from AppsFlyer, but potentially Nebo or Sharon or Kevin, are you seeing other tools that clients are using to help quickly assess how things are working and then being able to act on that insight? I'll leave that open to anyone.
Yeah, there's been a few new tools that came up. Outside of AppsFlyer's creative reporting tool, Replay is one of them. They're leveraging AI to analyze that. There's a small new company that's about to be announced. It's also trying to do this with the help of AI. I know that some folks are using Ellison Art, which is a smaller tool, which is a tool developed by Yellowhead. So there's a bunch of smaller tools that are not, I guess, widely used yet. And I think a lot of people are thinking in this direction. It's just really hard because a lot of times these problems are product specific, and you can't really build kind of one size fits all solution, which is why for subscription, for example, things that we do on the gaming side would not work at all. So that's why I feel most of the folks build this in-house. Great.
And Ray, I'm sure Max and team would be delighted to talk to you about some of the work that we're doing in that space. I'm going to finish just, as I say, mindful of time. I know we've got a few minutes left. So just to wrap up, and sorry for those questions that we haven't got to, I'm sure the attendees would be welcome a connection or an email and pick up this dialogue after the session. But just to wrap up, I'm going to give everyone a little 30-second closing statement. What is the one key takeaway from this? There's been a huge amount of insight, information, content. What's the one takeaway that you hope the folks that are still on the call leave this session with as we lead into 2023? Kevin, I'll hand it over to you to start us off.
Sure. So my key takeaway is that we as advertisers need to make sure that we get both the inputs and the outputs right in a downturn environment. So what does that mean? You have a clear hypothesis, define your success KPIs, calibrate your test to actually provide that answer, and make sure you're measuring honestly with data that's correct and quality.
Great. Nebo?
My key takeaway is just think about creating more holistically and try to understand how creative as the first touch point with your potential customer can help you inform your product roadmap as well. Especially with the lack of signal, you actually get the most signal out of creatives, because that's where you see the most potential customers, and just use that to build better products, to refine your products, and to essentially have a more successful performance marketing efforts. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Sharon?
Yeah, for me, I always say this, but especially now, I think in any type of downturn is super important. Make sure that your performance team, your brand team, and your creative team are talking to each other. Oftentimes we see, I mean, I see this in a lot of companies of friends of mine and such. They're quite isolated, and I think that's where the miscommunication happens, and maybe creative gets tested that should not be really tested from the get-go. So by unifying those three teams, you can have those like clear hypotheses that will lead you to more mindful testing and just better use of your money at the end of the day, really.
Great, which is going to be very important this year, I'm sure. And Max, last word from you.
Yeah, I have two key takeaways really quick. I think the first is again, just not to get complacent. It's really important to just continuously refresh your creatives and make sure you're constantly innovating, so you're not going to lose valuable time. And the second, again, is to really understand your supply and where you're spending. There are so many different media sources out there and different ways to get your app into the hands of the right audience. I think a lot of companies fall victim to this idea that Google and Facebook are the only two sources out there. And if you're not performing on Google and Facebook, you're not going to perform on other media sources. And I don't think that is correct. So that would be my main takeaway, I guess.
That's cheating. You gave us two there. I only asked for one. No, but that's great. Thank you all. And I hope everyone found this as insightful as I did. I know certainly I was scribbling away notes as the presentation and panel was ongoing. So great to get the lens of advertiser, agency, measurement partner, and we hope that you found this session really valuable. As mentioned in the chat, I know the team from Headlight will be sharing the presentation afterwards, and everyone on this call would welcome outreach and conversation to continue this. But thank you all. And I've just seen Sharon pop up here asking me to remind you. Yeah, please feel free to email any questions that you might have as a follow-up. But wishing you all a great 2023, and thanks again for joining us.